The following is a presentation of Stewed Productions.
This is InterBrews.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of InterBrews. Not on location at a brewery today around Houston as typical, but I am delighted. I'm giddy, Kimberly. I'm giddy. Kimberly Bowker, journalist, writer, and I think from the article that we're going to talk about today, a like-minded approach to craft beer as myself. So Kimberly, one, thank you so much for taking the time to be on InterBrews today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm rather giddy as well, to be honest.
All right, formalities. Let's talk about the things that are important in life. What beer are you currently drinking?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Well, right before meeting with you online, I looked in the fridge and there was one beer, and it's a great beer, but it's Silver Moon Brewing, which is a brewery here in Bend, and it's a Belgian-style white IPA called Tropic Zombie.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, and how about you?
I grabbed. We were talking just a little bit about the weather because it's super hot again here in Houston. Hofmeister, is the name of the beer. Huff Brewing in Belleville, Texas, which is just a little bit north of where I am. Ryan Huff and his family run the brewery. It's a Munich-style Helles lager, and it's you can't find much of it. So I came across the six-pack when I was traveling up to Austin, and had to grab some because it's one of my favorite spots. It's out on a farm, just really cool people and really good beer. And now it's open. And just a good lager just for a hotter than should be day, and delicious.
That does sound delicious. I'm happy we're having beers together over the internet.
Yes.
I wish I were there with you though, having that lager too. That sounds mighty fine.
Yeah, it's technology. I'm amazed by technology. You hear a lot of the downside to it, which, I guess everything in life has two sides, right? It's the old Dr. Phil, it doesn't matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always two sides. But it's true. You hear the bad side of, social media and things like that. But then you have moments like this where, you wrote this article, you're all the way in Oregon, we're in Houston. I haven't calculated the mileage. I'm sure it's, a good 20 hours apart for driving. And, we're able to sit down and have a beer together just like this and talk about awesome beer.
Agreed. I'm cheersing you right now. I know you can't see it, but.
Oh, I felt it though. All right. So first of all, let's talk about your background a little bit, because you write for craftbeer.com as well as local outlets, I suppose, around the Bend, Oregon area and Oregon. Well, you tell me, what do you do?
Yeah, you nailed it. I freelance a lot of writing and different articles, mostly about craft beer, a little bit about travel, and I love doing profiles about people. And so just kind of a little bit of everything here and there, but beer has been a passion and a mainstay of mine since the beginning, since I started writing and freelancing. I grew up in Oregon, here in Central Oregon, and after college, I got a job at the Bulletin newspaper here in Bend, and I worked in the business section. And I was a news assistant, and I would write a few articles as well. And this was in about 2007, 2008, so it was about 10 years ago. And there were quite a few different craft breweries opening in the area. And I started pitching all these story ideas for craft breweries because I had so much fun writing about them. I would talk to the owner, we would tour the facility. They would ask what kind of beer I like, and then they'd pour me a beer, and we'd have an interview over a pint, a conversation over a pint, kind of like we're doing right now. And it's such a wonderful industry in that regard. It's so supportive. There's a lot of sharing. which is caring, of course. And it's fun because you get to do it over a beer. So started doing that. I remember an article I wrote as well in 2008 for the Bulletin was about Tanya Cornett at Ben Brewing Company. And she was the first woman to win Best Brewmaster at the World Beer Cup. And that was in 2008. Oh. And I just remember being so inspired by her and her story. And so I ended up going to grad school in Eugene. And one of the assignments we had was to write an article about an issue or an essay about an issue. And I'm very non-confrontational. I like to have a good time and avoid conflict. So it was kind of a struggle for me. Yeah. But the issue, and it's not really an issue, but the concept I chose to write about was about women in the brewing industry. And so I did some research, learned some of the history. I talked to some amazing women like Terry Ferendorf, who founded Pink Boot Society. Mm-hmm. And I sent her the article when it was done. And she was writing a blog post for the Brewers Association about bringing your mom out for a beer on Mother's Day. Yeah. So she graciously offered me to write this post. And so I ended up doing that. And that's kind of how I continued on the beer writing journey. I love writing about breweries, opening up, the people behind them. And beer is so amazing because it's so reflective of humanity and values and who we are and how we come together in history. And I mean, there's everything in a pint of beer. There's science, chemistry, anthropology, history, technology. It's phenomenal. Yeah. It's just eternal.
Yeah. You know, I couldn't agree with you more. It's almost like I hear my own, thoughts coming back at me in your voice. When I started doing this podcast, very similar. It's been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now that I've been doing this podcast, and it just started for just a love of beer, but not so much of the it tastes good. Yeah. But when you delve into it and you start looking at, how it's made and the history behind it and how it's just paralleled all of human civilization and all of human history, really. It's an amazing thing that, we're able to drink, I'm drinking this beer here and, the grain was grown, maybe over in Germany. I don't know. I mean, half a world away. The water, it's like when you think about water, I mean, water's been around for the history of the world, right? And it's filtered through like the entire, like the process of the water cycle. I mean, if you want to go whole hog and just, mind blown, when you think about where could this water have been? Who drank this water before it came into my beer? It's I don't know. Maybe it came to this planet from a comet. Maybe it's from, 200 light years away at some point. I don't know. It's possible. Hops are this beautiful flower that don't grow anywhere near, well, maybe they grow near the grain, but not, not necessarily. And then yeast, which is this, magical thing, right? And it all comes together, and it's somehow through the process of, a brilliant brewer and a distribution team and the people that work at, the grocery store where it's kept and all of these things, somehow it ends up in my house and now in my hand. And you and I, who are, actually I looked at the mileage now, it's over 1,000 miles. It's actually not 20 miles. It's, 31 hours away for, past a mountain range. There's a Rocky Mountains, if you think about the history of mankind, this is crazy things we're doing right now. And it just, when you look at big picture, then all the way down to the smallest picture, like what's actually in the beer in front of me, it's, there's a spiritual element to it because it's like, that's the only real way you can wrap all those thoughts up and put them together. And it's sometimes it's a hard, idea to convey because it's so complex, so multifaceted. And that's one of the things when I was reading well, I was going to say your latest article, but you've got a new article we'll talk about in a second. But this one that caught my eye when you talk about secrets to pairing craft beer and people. Just listening and reading your writing style, I've read the article 4 or 5 times already, and I could just tell from the way you worded things and the way you approached talking about when somebody says I don't really like beer, or I don't know much about beer, and you talk about how that sends off the fireworks in your mind, and you're like, all right, this is going to be fun. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm right there with you. It's the best, right?
It is. Yeah. It's that process of discovery and discovering something new. And like you were saying, how it all connects: the water, the hops, the magical element of the yeast, and all the different possibilities that can happen in a pint. And, there's as many different possibilities for a type of beer or a flavor of beer as there are personalities and people. And that's one of the amazing things, is to offer somebody a beer that is maybe a little bit out of their comfort zone, but you've kind of chatted with them a little bit, and you just feel like, ooh, I think they might like a sour.
Yeah.
Never had one. I don't know, but I just get this feeling that they're going to dig it. And you give them this beer, perhaps a sour or something else, and they try it, and you just literally see their eyes widen. And that's one of the beautiful things for seasoned beer drinkers as well, is that still happens to us all the time too.
Yeah.
And it's always exploring these new worlds. No moment is ever the same. No moment, this moment has never happened before. And it's really about pairing a certain beer with a certain moment. And that is actually something that I had learned at Deschutes Brewery as well, when I worked there for about 3 years in the tasting room and giving tours of the facility. And they are such a fantastic company, and I learned so much, and it feels like family, and it really lives those values. And so that really helped me to be able to have the freedom and the knowledge and the passion to connect with the customers and those drinking beer.
Okay, so you mentioned Deschutes, and I want to hear all about your time there. Before that, back up before that, and from the time, like growing up in Oregon, I'm jealous. That when you being able to drink beer right away, that was fantastic. Most of us that are not so, I'm not gonna say privileged, but so blessed, I guess, with the surroundings that you had. It's a much different story. It's we grew up, stealing beers from the fridge that our dad had. That was the typical light lagers that were just pervasive for so long in this country. And then, and someday we discover craft beer by chance, and then it took off from there. But you grew up in an area where it was, way advanced. Like the evolution of beer in Oregon is an amazing thing. Tell me how that those first beers you tried, and then eventually getting to working at one of the best breweries in the world. What was that journey?
Well, thanks for asking that. The first beer I ever had was a Henry Weinhard's beer. And I remember it because I was on a first date, and he wanted to take me out fishing in one of the lakes here. Uh-huh. So we got in his dad's boat. We went out on this big lake. I also had like a broken toe at the time, so I had one of those big casts on my legs, one of those big boots on my legs. And he had made like bologna sandwiches, and he had this cooler, and there was Henry Weinhard's in there. So I remember that being my first beer, and it paired perfectly with bologna sandwich and while you're out on a lake fishing. Uh-huh. The date kind of turned into a debacle. We actually ran out of gas and had to like hike back in the dark, and the search and rescue were out there. Anyway, all turned out okay. But I remember that being my first beer. And I remember my very first craft beer was at Bend Brewing Company here in Bend. And they started, I believe, in the 90s. And I didn't know anything about beer. I didn't really know much about alcohol. I think I'd had like Smirnoff ices kind of were my thing. But I went there, I think I was 21 or 22, and I didn't know what to get. And the bartender kind of did something similar, kind of walked me through kind of the basics. And we thought that I would like a porter. And I can't remember if it had chocolate undertones or coffee undertones. I can't really remember the profile of it. But I remember getting the pint glass, picking it up from the bar, and it's this beautiful deep color. And I remember holding it up, and the light was coming through the window and kind of reflecting off this glass. And I smelled it, and it was like nothing I'd ever had smelled before when it comes to beverages. And I just remember, I distinctly remember, and it might have been the light, coming through the whole moment, but I distinctly remember feeling like I had something really special in my hand. And I tried it, and that was kind of it. So the porters and stouts were definitely my gateway craft beers, and then it goes on from there. We get to navigate and make our own maps about all the different styles we try and what we like, and where we go forward from there. Yeah.
I've been drinking a lot of porters here lately. It's funny you say that. The weather in Houston gets anywhere south of 80 or 85, and you're like, oh yeah, this is porter weather for sure.
Yeah, you get the out.
Okay, so one thing I mentioned earlier is that the area you grew up in and came of age to drink beer in is definitely a blessing and an amazing thing. But we're in an interesting time now as craft breweries grow, as there's more of them, and I think we're the luckiest people in the history of mankind. Right now is the best time to be alive, especially if you're a beer drinker. The fact, it's it's great, but I'm glad when I think back, I'm looking at the list of Deschutes' year-round beers, and I look at Black Butte Porter and Mirror Pond Pale Ale, and the fact that when I got into craft beer here in Houston, we're over 50 in the Houston area, over 50 breweries now, but it wasn't that long ago where there was only about 5 or 6, and so beers from Oregon and California and East Coast as well were more prominent, and they stuck out more because there just wasn't that much local stuff. And so I got to try Black Butte Porter, which is an amazing beer, and Mirror Pond Pale Ale. I mean, just fantastic beers. And so, now Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, some of those beers that, I don't know, regionally, I guess those are still, I would imagine, very prominent where you're at. But we have so much local stuff. They're still around. You just don't see as much, especially if you're trying to, stay, in front of the, trying to try all the new stuff. I need an extra liver and more time. It's an enjoyable burden to have to try all the new stuff from all the breweries around here. But I'm glad that when I was, getting into craft beer, those beers were available to try. So I guess that's that other side of that pancake. So I'm glad I got to try that, and it makes me want to, get out to or I've never been up to the Pacific Northwest at all, and I would love to get up there and, spend a month just traveling and drinking beers.
Oh, we'd love to have you out here. Give me a holler if you ever do find your way out in this neck of the woods. Yeah, no, it would be fantastic. It's on my list of things. I've got all kinds of goals for this podcast. One is to get a short bus and make it into a mobile studio and then just hit the road. That would be fantastic. It would be cool, but see if my wife would be cool with that too. That's I don't know. We'll see. But it's one of the plans. But that's part of it. I'm just looking at this list of beers and I'm like, yeah, I've had a lot of these, and there's so many good beers out there. And one of the I like it now that things are more regional. I don't see breweries reaching out as far as they used to. And,
just because there's so much local now. And I think that's a good thing, because even when I travel to Austin, there's beers in Austin that we don't get in Houston. And same thing with San Antonio and Dallas and West Texas and Louisiana and all these other places. It's cool. It's like, I don't know, you're traveling to a whole nother, it really is like traveling to a whole nother world when you can get into the local beers and stuff. So I don't know there's not really a question in there. I just, I don't know. All right. So one, you guys were rescued from the boat, and do you still keep in contact with the guy you went on the date with?
No, that's a good question. No, we got actually lost in the woods a second time over with the boat. Again, it was a different lake. It was a couple of years later.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, yeah.
That was kind of it.
We didn't have any beer on that trip, so.
No redeeming point.
No.
Yeah, get me lost in the woods once,
Yeah.
Shame on whoever, but twice. Yeah. No. I hope he didn't go back by himself and he's still out there in the woods somewhere.
I know. No, we made it back together, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck.
Regret for me, I guess.
Well, best of luck to him. I don't know. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully he got better at that whole nav.
Beer too, so.
What was that?
He got me into craft beer though too, so.
Well, there's that.
A blessing, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, guy. So okay. So there was the date, and then there was the discovering more beers. Then you got the job at Deschutes. How did that come about?
Yeah, I got the job there about 3 years ago or so. And since then, I had done a number of articles for craftbeer.com. I used to write for Beer West as well, which was a great magazine. I don't think they're around anymore. I did some personal essays as well about beer for local publications, and so had really done a lot of writing about beer. I had done a stint out in Kansas where I actually had the most amazing unfiltered wheat beers of my life.
Yeah.
So good. Going back to that idea of local and the ingredients there, and so I had come back to Oregon, home to Oregon, and I was looking for a job. And, Deschutes Brewery started in 1988 downtown. And I had always grown up here with the brewery as part of the community at different events and supporting the community, and just really living here in Central Oregon, and it's such a big part of Central Oregon. And when I used to work at the brewery giving tours, that was one of my favorite things to mention to folks, is that, we appreciate all the support that the community gives us, and, it helps us support the community in turn. So I grew up just always knowing of Deschutes and having it be around. And so I just walked in one day with a resume and dropped it off and a cover letter, and I didn't really know what I could do or what I would be qualified for. And they ended up calling back, and we had a great interview. I remember one of the interview questions was, what is your favorite beer? It doesn't have to be Deschutes beer. And why is it your favorite, or how would you describe this beer? And I remember that was a really fun interview. And then it was also playing Journey, Don't Stop Believing in the floor when I walked in. And I always get really excited whenever I hear that song. I feel like I can just do anything.
What was the answer to the question?
The answer to the question was a Deschutes beer. It was Jubal Ale, which is the winter seasonal. And I love that beer. I again, kind of grew up really excited. Every winter it would come out, and they pick a different regional artist to create a new piece of their artwork, which then they put onto the beer's label each year. And so it's always fun, part of that discovery, to see what the artwork is and so forth. And it's just a really beautiful beer. So it's a great seasonal. So that was the answer to that question. So yes, we called, and then I started in the tasting room and giving tours. And I knew a little bit about beer at that point, just from all the interviews and talking to people and trying beers. But actually working at the brewery, I learned so much. There is just so much to learn about beer, and you just learn something new every day.
Yeah, it's so yeah, I've wanted to work in a brewery, or I mean, maybe that's why I just spend so much time at them. Because I've worked in, you do writing. I've worked in media for 20 years, I guess now. Since I was, in my teens, and radio and TV and all that stuff. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing when there's, I have friends that are brewers and friends that, work in the, production side of beer and sales and that sort of thing. But to be on the side that we're on as more of I don't know what you would call us, professional observers. I don't know, but it's a cool angle to have. But yeah, I do, when I see the guys coming out covered in sweat, to come and do an interview with me, right after a brew day or whatever. There's you describe yourself as a romantic, I think, on your website, and or maybe on your Twitter feed. I don't know. Somewhere I know for a fact that you called yourself a romantic. But there's something about that just is really intriguing and I don't know. It's just I don't know. I mean, are you like that too? Do you see that? And I guess working there yourself, you got to experience some of that.
Yes, definitely. And the other thing too, working at a brewery and seeing knowing the brewers who make the beer and their senses of humor. And the amazing thing about craft beer that we forget about is that it is handmade, and it's hard work. And like you said, they're sweating, they're always keeping things clean. They're, shoveling in all those fresh hops during fresh hop season into the tank. I mean, that's a lot of shoveling sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful to know the people who are making these amazing products. And it takes a team, it takes a village. Everybody at a brewery is part of that and part of that story. One of the things I mentioned in the article is I used to love giving some anecdotal information or kind of the history of a specific beer or the history of a style for the customer or the beer drinker to connect to that beer. Because sometimes the more we know about something, we feel it. We feel more invested in what we're experiencing and what we're tasting. It's part of that connection. And so I remember for some beers, talking with one of the brewers, and maybe the brewer mentioned something specific about a certain beer. I would love to share that with the customers as well, because it's something true and real, and helps them feel more connected to the story behind the beer.
Yeah, it's I feel that, well, I don't feel, I've observed there are, we've been around the craft beer revolution, craft beer wave long enough to see some breweries come and then some breweries go. And there a pattern emerges when there's not a lot of that heart and story behind what they're doing. Not to say that they don't love beer, but there seems to be I don't know, it's a piece of it though. When there's, you can see when, each beer has a story, how they came to it, the, inspiration behind it. The inspiration has to be there, other than just we made this beer because, market trends were pointing this way. It could be a really good beer, but for me personally, I'm with you. if I don't buy into the actual story behind the beer, I'm way less intrigued. Mm-hmm. And it really does. It affects the way the beer tastes. I don't know if science can, figure that one out.
Maybe quantum physics.
Maybe I don't know, but the emotional side of it is real. When I go to my friends, I have friends at a lot of the breweries around here, a lot of really good friends. And when you see them and they smile and they, put their arm around you, say, man, I'm glad you're here. And then it's like, try this beer. And then them and the story behind it, it's just better. Yeah. So that's a real part of it. And then when you talked about the porter and the light, I have a similar experience when I started this podcast, or when I wanted to start a podcast. I wasn't sure what I wanted it to be about. I was getting into craft beer, but I didn't feel like I knew enough to actually talk about craft beer. And I was right. So that's why I went and talked to other people that knew a lot about it. And I still do that. It's nice to take that burden off of you. It's like, oh, I don't have to be the expert. I can go talk to the experts, and they give me a lot of free beer. And so that's pretty cool. But I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary about how beer saved the world. It was this little Discovery Channel, like 1 hour, documentary. And it talked about how, beer paralleled like the invention of math and agriculture and mass production and all of these things, farming. It all was because of beer, like the motivation behind it all. It's like, how do we get the grain to grow in these rows? And it was all based on math and all this other thing. And how antibiotics came from beer. The Egyptians had, tetracycline in their bones because they drank beer, or a form of beer, right? But I was watching, watching the little documentary one night. I work nights being in TV. And so I was watching that documentary at my kitchen table while, my wife and my daughters are all asleep. This is when they were really young. So the house was quiet, and that doesn't happen very often. And it was just a really peaceful moment. And, I have I've told this story on the podcast before, but I guess I'll go ahead and tell it again. I grew up in Arkansas in a dry county in a very, very religious, part of the country. The city I grew up in, or the town I grew up in, is known as the city of churches because there were more churches per capita than any other place, back in the day. And, the church we went to was, it wasn't as extreme as the one on Footloose, but there was a similar element about drinking and that sort of thing. And when I got away, I moved to Houston when I was 21 and was able to spread my wings a bit and make some decisions for myself. And I was like, there was that inner conflict of, should I like beer or whatever? Is that okay? And the light from the dining room table, I was sitting on the dining room table and it was kind of shining down. It was the only light in the house on. And I watched it. And as I saw how beer paralleled all these historical events and allowed mankind to get to the point we are now, I was like, oh, yes, beer is good. This is inspired. And then it was like I felt the light shining down on me. It was a 75-watt light bulb. So I don't know if it was the almighty or just, the electricity, but either way, it inspired me enough to start this podcast. But yeah, that's my light story too. But there's something about light.
Yeah.
Like the sun hits you just right or whatever. It's
like whole new world. Yes.
It like when it shines through that beer and it just illuminates everything going on in there. I don't know. There's an element there that is undeniable. To talk about this article about pairing craft beer with people, I just love this article. It really does come down to people when you're talking about beer. That is the best part. And so what, one, how did you start writing for craftbeer.com? And then two, this article in particular, what inspired this article in particular?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for the compliment on the article too. So when I started writing for craftbeer.com, it was kind of right out of grad school when I was just starting to do some freelance. And that was actually kind of what got me started on the freelance train, especially with beer, and also on the beer train, so to speak, in terms of writing. And it was that Bring Your Mom Out for a Beer Day blog post that Terry had offered me to write.
Okay.
And I had such a fun time writing it that I just started continually pitching craftbeer.com and have worked with some amazing editors there as well. And I think the inspiration for this article, pairing a person and a beer, was just my time behind the bar and meeting so many different types of people. We would have international visitors. We would have the locals and the regulars that come in. We'd have the couples who take their weekly walk and make the tasting room their kind of midway stop for a beer and go back. And it was just meeting so many different types of people. And I loved talking with them. And it was amazing how quickly you can really get to know somebody over a conversation about beer or over a pint of beer as well. You just ask the questions. Where are you from? What have you been doing since you've been here? What do you like to do? You find out where they're from, and maybe you've had a great beer from where they're living, near where they're living. So that starts a great conversation. One of my favorite things to do, if I felt like I was kind of connecting with a person, I would love to, I would ask them first if they were game for it, because I love pairing a beer and a person or a personality, just kind of using intuition and knowledge of the beers as well. So I would just ask 3 random questions of whatever came to my head, and then just kind of intuitively pick one of the beers that we had available that complemented the answers. And you really would get to know somebody so well based on those answers. Can I try it with you maybe?
Sure.
Okay. I'm a little rusty. It's been a little while since I've done this, but okay. What is your favorite environment? So like forest, mountains, ocean, desert?
Forest.
Forest.
Yeah.
Okay. What is your middle name?
Charles.
Charles. And what is the meaning of life to you?
Relationship.
Relationship.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay, so forest, Charles, relationship. I would, let's see, if I could have my choice, I would pour you right now the Abyss, which is a Deschutes Brewery beer. It is a barrel-aged stout, aged in bourbon, wine, and oak barrels. It's molasses, brewer's licorice. It is a barrel-aged beer, so it's kind of heavy, but beautiful and so complex. And I think I would pour that for you because your answers they're all very rooted. Like forests, they have the roots and they go up vertical into the sky, and so you can feel that connection to the earth. Charles is kind of a traditional name, maybe in the family, so then there's that stability. And then relationships too, which are so important, but they can also sometimes be challenging as well, challenging and rewarding. And it's how we grow, and it's how we connect in this world. And so I think there's a little combination of groundedness with surprise and openness. So that's why I would do the Abyss, is because it's a very, very grounded, beautiful, solid beer, but there's a lot of nuances of different excitements and flavors when you try it.
Do you know, do they distribute that? Because I want one now so bad.
I think so. I think they do. It's seasonal, so it's usually out in the wintertime.
Okay. I think I've heard of it for sure. I'll have to go see if we get it. Let me see. Let me look. I know I've heard of it. It's I love barrel aged beers, sours, bourbon barrel aged, whatever. It's there's so many elements. Let's see, where's it at? Looking at the website now.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't see it. Where you said seasonal?
Yeah, it's usually a winter time. I think it's usually out around November or December.
Would it be under the reserve series, maybe?
Yeah, it would be a reserve.
I don't see it. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Okay.
Anyway, hey, let me try it with you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. I'm not as attuned to this, so forgive me if I go awry. All right.
It's gonna be great. Just follow your intuition.
Okay.
Follow your heart.
All right. Peanut butter, smooth or crunchy?
Crunchy.
Okay, correct. Do you have a pet, and what is it?
I do not have a pet.
Have you ever had a pet?
Yes. My first pet was a floppy-eared bunny, and his name was Nick, and he would run circles around us outside on the deck. Yeah.
Okay. If you could have any car or vehicle of any, cost is no thing to think about. It's just whatever most, you could drive it up and down the coast or road trip across the country. What vehicle would you choose?
Land Rover Defender.
Okay. So here we go. You said crunchy, so texture is important. Floppy-eared bunny is it's warming, but a Land Rover is a robust vehicle, but still has the ability to it's multifaceted. So, I'm gonna say, style-wise, double IPA.
Ooh.
Specifically, let me think. Well, if you were here locally, here in Houston, I would say St. Arnold's Endeavor, double IPA. Just a big, malty but hoppy, but just textured beer. You've got the malty smoothness, but then the bite of the hops, and then but it's also around I think a 8.5% beer, so it's versatile. If I were to, let me think of one that would be available more everywhere. Double IPA.
I wish I had one of those St. Arnold's Endeavors in my hand right now too. I mean, just the name alone as well.
Yeah. Yes. Well, talk about a brewery that has story behind it. So St. Arnold, the patron saint of brewers. I don't guess they don't distribute out to Oregon. I think they did to Colorado for just a little while and then decided to pull back. But they're Texas's oldest craft brewery, so they're over 20 years now they've been around. The story of St. Arnold of Metz was that he went around during the Dark Ages, extolling the virtues of drinking beer instead of water, because the water was not clean, and beer would keep you alive, but yet still provide sustenance and keep you alive. And so he went around doing that. And when he passed away, they were going on the funeral march, and they were carrying him, and it was a hot day, and everybody was very thirsty, and they went to the pub. They walked past the pub, and this is back in like the 500s or 600s. This is way back in the day, I think. Maybe later than that, maybe like thousands. But anyway, a long time ago. And they only had the one mug of beer left. And there were, a bunch of guys carrying him, and the whole funeral parade. And so the miracle happened for him to get his sainthood when somebody went to take a sip of beer and they handed it to the next person. The beer never ran out. And so everybody got to drink until they were, their thirst was slaked. And that was the miracle of St. Arnold. And now he is the patron saint of brewers and brewing. Endeavor, we're here in Space City, right? So Endeavor was one of the space shuttles. Also, their IPA was named after a ship called the Alyssa, which is actually still docked in Galveston Bay, and you can go tour it. It's an old clipper ship, and then Endeavor was also a ship similar to that but bigger. So there was the tie-in to the IPA and the Imperial IPA, and then also it was named after the space shuttle here in Space City. Anyway, so story, texture, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know.
I love it. I love the history and the story. St. Arnold, he sounds like a good guy.
Yeah.
Sounds like a dude.
Yes, we need more of him. I think that's kind of where our role now. We're taking his lead, and now we're extolling the virtues of beer to the masses.
That's right.
I like that game. Can I borrow that idea and maybe?
Oh, please, yeah.
Okay, like what would you call it? Just the three questions, because we do a live show on Thursdays. And what's your schedule like on Thursdays? I have to ask.
Well, right now I have Thursdays off, so I'm actually pretty free on Thursdays.
Okay, what 10 a.m. Because local time, it's called Liquid Lunch is the name of the show. And we stream a live show on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, and it's covering the entire state of Texas and the beers, and we'll Skype in brewers from across the state. It's myself, and then Catherine Contreras, who is my co-host. She had a podcast in San Antonio called She's Crafty, and now her apparel company or fashion company, Barbacoa Apparel, which is a very San Antonio based. Inspired T-shirts and stickers and all kinds of stuff. That's kind of her full-time gig now. And then she does Liquid Lunch with us on Thursdays. So this would be a fun one to do on Liquid Lunch for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pencil you in. So what should we call it? What would that segment be called? Just 3 questions or? Yeah,
just
something.
Sometimes I call it my party trick, but.
Party trick. Ooh, I like that too.
Yeah. It's just because I don't have one, so.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't have one either. I need to come up with one. Maybe I'll. No, I'm not gonna steal yours, but it's a good one.
Please feel free. Feel free if the more the merrier. And that's one of the great things about the industry is the more the merrier.
Yes, and Socrates said there's no original ideas, but we take those ideas and we put our own personal twist on them because everybody's got their own experience and background and everything else. So it becomes a new thing. Just like the beers the beers in Oregon, I'm sure there's, how many breweries are there in the Bend? How far is Bend from Portland?
So Bend, it's across the Cascade Mountains. So it's roughly about 3.5 hours or so. It's usually 4 hours if I'm driving because I'm kind of a slow driver. But so. Okay,
so it's kind of Dallas Houston difference. Yeah. Okay, so in the Bend area, how many breweries are there in the Greater Bend area?
That is a really good question. In the region, I think we've got. The last time I checked, we had a little more than 24 in the Central Oregon area. Okay. So, yeah, so maybe late 20s or so in about 3 different counties. That might be radically incorrect, but from memory, that's what's popping into my head. So. Okay. There are quite a few. Deschutes was the first one in '88, and then have had a bunch of wonderful breweries come in, and it's fun to see the different niches as well that different breweries will focus on. Mm-hmm. For example, a couple years ago we got a Belgian style brewery. They make amazing beer. It's called Monkless, and so that was really kind of a focus for that brewery to offer to the community. So it's really fun to see the different styles and the different niches of all the breweries that are here and available.
That's cool. Yeah, it's that's the thing. Yeah, people talk about the craft beer bubble and things like that, and I don't think there's so much variety in people's approach to it. I don't even think we're close. I mean, you look at a place like where you're at, and you've got that many like, how big is Bend? How many people live in Bend?
Bend's been really growing. I think it's probably up around 90,000 now or so.
Okay. I mean, not a small place, but we've got twice as many breweries in the area, but I mean, Houston's like 2 million or 3 million, or it's a lot. It's a whole bunch of everybody. And it's really spread out too. Because when I say 50 breweries in the area, I'm talking about, an hour north of me and an hour and a half south of me. So, that's, I don't know how many miles that is, but it's a big area, but that's, all of the metropolitan area, or that's Houston area. So, we always look at places like Colorado and Oregon and West Coast and, inspired, to say, hey, we're not even close. Let's look at what these guys have been doing for a while longer. So, yeah, I it's good stuff. Do you have any beers that like recently have just really been speaking to you, or I don't know, something new you've tried lately that just kind of wowed you?
I'm really glad you asked. Yesterday I was in Corvallis, which is in the Valley. It's where Oregon State is. Go Beavs.
Okay.
And there's a great brewery there called Block 15. And I recently went to their tap room, and it is one of those setups where the tanks are right there, so you can see the brewers working, which is great. You can wave to them if you want. And I had a couple new beers there that I hadn't had before. I had a Brett Lager, which was really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was good. It was really good. I went for a little tentative. I've had the sour IPAs. I know that's been a thing recently, but I hadn't seen a Brett Lager or soured lager, and it was tasty.
Yeah.
It was balanced, and I really enjoyed what was going on around my taste buds with that beer. So I tried that one, and I also, let's see, I had a hazy pale, which was pretty good. And also Alembic style. It was a great name. It was called Turbulent Consequences.
Yeah.
And it was Alembic style with cassis or maybe black currant, but that was pretty tasty as well.
Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying right now kind of the mix of styles, the unexpected mixes that we're getting now, where you take two kind of traditional styles or ingredients and you put them together to see what you get. And that's where some of the artistry and the challenge comes in too, is how to balance these two different experiences going on with these different styles, and when you combine them, how you make that a balanced experience as well for this new entity.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, I'm kind of concentrating when you say Brett Lager. I'm thinking, I want to know when, is it all Brett fermentation, or do they add it, is it pre or post lagering? Do they bring it down so that the Brett kind of shuts down? Do they, how does that work? That makes, I'm so curious about, what's going on there.
I'm not exactly sure. I would hate to say something and have it be incorrect. I remember reading the description, but I think I was enjoying the beer too much.
Yeah, that happens. I enjoyed the third one as much as the first one, but all the details started to leave me around that time. Okay, so you said a hazy pale. Is are NEPAs, New England IPAs, hazy IPAs, are they as big in Oregon as they are here?
Yes, yeah, they started getting big maybe roughly about a year ago or so.
Okay.
Was that kind of about the same timeline for you, or?
Yeah, we have a few breweries here that want, I don't know. I mean, I'm always in the middle of Houston beer, talk, but we've got a couple of breweries here that have kind of been, the buzz of the hazy, juicy IPAs, Spindle Tap and B52, and if, everybody's making them, but those two in particular have really been, going whole hog, as they say, into the haze craze. And I had this theory that the reason the hazy IPAs were doing so well here and tasted, a lot of them are really, really good. I don't know. They again, there's so much of a spectrum there. Like, is it the more juicy side, fruity, juicy, almost orange juice kind of stuff, or is it the something that grabs your throat and says, hey, grabs you by the throat to remind you that you're drinking these super fresh hopped beers and that sort of thing. But because Houston's so hazy with all the humidity and everything else, I figured that was in the beer as well. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, they're there's a certain sect of the beer crowd that's just bananas. They're bananas over hazy IPAs. I don't know. What do you think about them personally?
Personally, I've really been enjoying them. I've had a couple really, really good ones. And then sometimes some of them I try are not necessarily my favorite. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things I've actually been really enjoying about it, including the juiciness and the hop flavor, is also the appearance and looking at the haze and the different colors that these beers are coming in. Mm-hmm. And the haze, it almost takes me back in time a little bit, to historic beer times. I'm doing air quotes right now. When they didn't have all the filtration system, and probably back in the day, a lot of beers may have had that haze to it as well.
And you know what, there's something about it. I don't know if it's way above my education level, but it does affect the flavor. And because some of them will settle out, and mm-hmm. people will swear, oh, this doesn't taste the same as it did. And they're one of those beers you really want to drink fresh. At least from my experience, it seems that the fresher, the better, or maybe even I don't know, there's a sweet spot of a few days that some of them, if you can hit that, then it's like, it really sings. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It's a whole new thing that, I think we've, I don't know. Trends are funny. Like, will it stick around? Yeah. Maybe, I guess. I don't know. Or will it always have a place, but it'll get smaller? I don't know. But, I'll just watch it and try them.
Yeah, it is. That's a good, game plan. I like it. Can I steal that one?
Sure. Yeah. I don't do much predictions. They're fun, I guess, to kind of try to do, but I would have never seen hazy IPAs coming, and they just kind of came out of nowhere. And I remember somebody talking about them, one of the Facebook groups or some chat group or whatever. And I'm like, that's a trend. It'll be gone in, soon. And then they were just everywhere. And I was like, okay, well, now I got to try them. And then I'm talking about them too. So,
yeah, I think they're a style as well now, an official style for under the style guidelines with the BA, I believe. Yeah,
they are. And I mean, that's good. More style, I think that's good. I don't, style, the guidelines, they're a funny thing because, not every interview I've done, but a lot of times you whether it's explicitly stated or not, I think brewers like to, they acknowledge what a style is, and then they like to go off, off script. They like, they see the style, and they're like, yeah, that is the style, and that's not what we're doing, but we're going to call it this style or whatever. And so, yeah, I think style guidelines come into being, and then it allows the brewers to rebel.
Exactly. You have to know the rules to break them.
Yes. Yeah. It can't just be all willy nilly. We got to have order, and then you can shake it up. You can't just start with a pile of mess.
And it's so interesting styles too, because they've evolved through the years, and it's never a distinct, definitive thing. It's always in a range of ABV or IBUs or characteristics with the beer. And just like humanity, we're always moving and grooving and changing and evolving, and the style guidelines are too.
Yes. And the styles that kind of have resurgencies or become more popular, like as hazy IPAs have been getting popular, and we're coming off of bourbon barrel aged beers and that sort of thing. A few years ago, that was when they were kind of newer. Then you had like Berliner Weiss and Gozas coming back, which is the stark opposite. And there's some really, really good versions of those beers that, I don't know, I feel like I'm not going to say Goza or Berliner Weiss have been under the radar, but I do think that the hop heads are a little louder than the I don't know, the Goza enthusiasts. I don't know what I don't know what you call somebody who's really into Gozas. I love them.
I love them too. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, they work really well in hot weather, and on the beach. Something about like a little bit of salt in that beer that kind of mixes with the air, and then boom, it's all kind of, it's good stuff.
That sounds like a good moment right there. A Goza and a beach.
Yeah. It does.
Yeah, and that's a great resurgence too that you were talking about, the Gozas and the Berliner Weisses coming back as a resurgence. I did an article about the history of the American Pale Ale for the Brewers Association, and I thought it was fascinating, the history of the pale ale. It's such a tried and true beer. It was some of the first styles that the craft brewers in the U.S. were making, Sierra Nevada, of course, and Deschutes with the Mirror Pond. But it's fascinating because there's almost a resurgence now of the pale, or there might be in the near future, to go back to some of these sturdy, tried and true beginning beers. And also, I believe I was chatting with somebody at Sierra Nevada, and they were mentioning that the younger generation of beer drinkers in their 20s, they kind of got into the game with IPAs and sours and all these really big, robust beers. And there might be a coming back to the pale ale because they've never really experienced it, because they got into the industry and beer drinking at a time when there was a lot of other things going on. So it's almost a revisiting of the classics.
Yeah.
That might happen.
Yeah. Same thing happens with, music and fashion and even like the shows on TV that come back. Like they don't make new shows. They bring old shows and they, redo them. Because, those old shows, they were good. They had their time. People wanted to move on, but then there's a whole nother, generation of people like, Pilsner. I think Pilsners have come up a bit. I don't know. Yeah. Those kids, they don't know about pale ales or brown ales, hoppy brown ale or, a great porter or some of those, those classic, the craft beer, mid late 90s, kind of the craft beer staples. Those are really good styles, but everybody was like, oh, we, been there, done that. But then this is a whole group of people that hadn't even seen them or, really experienced them for what they can really, really be. So, yeah, it's the same thing when you look back on some of the big beer, like Sierra Nevada or even like Sam Adams Boston Lager or, I don't know, Anchor Steam, some of those beers that we kind of take, they've just always been around and they kind of fall off the radar because you're trying all this other stuff. But then you go back to some of those old school beers and they're just fantastic beers. So, hopefully those young kids can experience what we experienced, but then they'll come back and put their own spin on it.
Yeah. Circle of life.
Circle of life. Absolutely. Well, Kimberly, I think that's probably a good note to come out on and wrap up the show for now. But where can people see your work? Obviously, craftbeer.com, your newest article, pairing beers with books.
Yeah.
Some of the books on the list, one was, will it work with the movies as well?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Jurassic Park was one of them. And we just got I love that my girls I have 3 daughters, and they're getting to the age where we're able to watch some of the movies that, my wife and I grew up watching. And so Jurassic Park was one, and they loved it.
Oh. So
that was Jurassic Park, one of the books on the list. What did you say? Let's see. What did you pair with Jurassic Park? Do you remember off the top of your head?
No,
It was...
I think it was dinosaur themed.
Yes, it was Fossil Craft Beers, Megalodon Blonde, or Cedar Creek Dankosaurus. Dankosaurus is a great beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have range as far as your books. Harry Potter to William Shakespeare to the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Yeah.
Classic. Yeah.
Yeah. Lonesome Dove, Texas, everybody. I think that's required reading in high school for Texans. But, yeah, books. It's a good time to read. I don't know if it's ever a bad time to read a book, but the fall, as it's starting to cool down a bit, sit outside on a late afternoon, sip a beer, and get into a book, get lost in it. Yeah, that's good stuff.
That sounds fantastic. That might be my plan for the afternoon now that you mention it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe by the fire pit, if it's cool enough, which, if we can get under 80, that's all we want here. That's fire pit weather here.
That's good. I'll be sending the vibes. I'll be sending the good weather vibes your way.
Well, we appreciate it. But Kimberly, thank you so much for being on this episode. And let's see, you have a Twitter account. I'm sorry, Kimberly. What's your middle initial? Is it J? Do I remember?
J.
Kimberly J. Bowker. And
my middle name is Jane. I guess I asked yours earlier, so just to keep it even.
Cool. And then, of course, craftbeer.com, and then you have your website as well. We'll post all the links below. Anything specific you're working on now? I mean, we got the end of the year coming up, holiday season, anything that's, you're kind of mulling over to write about, or anything you're excited about, or how does that work? How does a brilliant writer decide what they're going to write about?
Oh, thank you. It comes from somewhere else sometimes. It's the most amazing thing. Just with all of creativity, just an idea forms from somewhere, usually from an experience. So I get a lot of my ideas while I'm experiencing what I'm going to write about, and see how that experience or feeling can be reflective of something bigger. I find with writing, something that's really important is to always have a deeper meaning or a truth that's kind of universal and can connect people. So I always try to do that and see, dig for those treasures and see what's there. I actually don't have anything on the docket right now. So yeah, so sitting outside this afternoon and drinking a beer by the fire pit, maybe it'll be beers by the fire to share with friends.
There you go. Yeah, I've got I'll send you pictures of what we, I think this week we're supposed to get a cool front. Mm. We get so excited about cool fronts around here because we don't get many of them. So, woo. Anyway. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. And I'll let you get to that, inspiration fuel, aka another beer, outside, maybe with a good book or whatever. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and thank you for writing the articles that you write, because they really are good. I really enjoy it. Just something about putting the words to an idea that, I feel like we're beer kindred spirits in that thought wave. And so it was inspiring to me. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And I really had a good time talking with you about beer and the deeper meanings of it too. And just, really appreciate you and all of the work you do, getting the word out and helping with the discovery and connection. So thank you. I had a blast today. I appreciate it.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you. And everybody, check out our work. We'll put links below. And Kimberly, you have a great rest of your day, great week, great rest of your year. We'll talk soon again because the next time I read an article, we can do this again. Kimberly Bowker, everybody. Check her out, craftbeer.com, as well as her website and all that. So, Kimberly, thank you. Thank you for listening, everybody. For Kimberly, I'm Josh. This is InterBrews.
This is InterBrews.
The preceding has been a presentation of Stewed Productions.